Hi, everybody. Welcome to the conversation stream for another week. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I am very, very happy to be joined this week by my friend, by someone who we were just talking before we went on the air. The last time we actually got to hang out in person was 4 whole years ago. When we met in Washington, D.C., and spent a few hours together and actually got to go to the Air and Space Museum, which was really cool that I still think about. I think that was the last time I've been to the Air and Space Museum, unfortunately. Whenever COVID's over with, I'm definitely going back, but it's been a while. So, anyway, my friend, activist and podcaster and author and mutual aid doer and person working very hard to make the world a better place any way she can, Danielle Muscato. Thank you very much for being here, my friend.
Thank, thank you so much, Steve, for organizing this and inviting me to come on. I just want to say, I mean, there's a pandemic right now. There's a lot of important things that we could be talking about. A lot of people watching this, coming to terms with things like mortality and questions about like what do we really want to be doing with our short time on this planet. And I want to say, it just means a lot to me. Uh, Personally, that the people watching this are, this is what you are choosing to do with your Monday evening. Thank you. I appreciate that you watching and that you care enough to listen to what I have to say and what this conversation, to do this with your time. Thank you. If you have questions for us, we're watching the YouTube live chat here, and please feel free to ask those. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah. So if you don't know me already, as Steve mentioned, I'm Danielle Muscato. My friends call me Ellie. My pronouns are she and her. Um, I'd love for you to go ahead and grab your phone while you're watching, and just go ahead and follow me on Twitter at Danielle Muscato, and check me out on Patreon also at Danielle Muscato. My income comes full time from this. I'm a Patreon funded full time activist, and that's how I pay my bills. My average pledge every month is like $6.40 or something like that, and that's literally how I'm able to do everything I'm going to be talking about today. So if you're able to check that out, or even just share it with people you think you might be interested in supporting my work, please feel free to do that. I'd appreciate it. And I just want to say also that I love interacting with the people who follow me and who care about the type of stuff that I'm working on. So please feel free to reach out, tweet at me or message me if you have questions, or if you want to replicate some of the work that I'm doing in your city, or get involved with activists doing the work that I do in your city. Reach out to me. I can help. I want to help. That's why I do this. That's what people pay me to do. That's why I'm happy to do it. And I want to. Or if book recommendations too. I love recommending books. If you, I mean, I read a lot, and if there's something that you have a question about that you want a good recommendation for, that's kind of a hobby of mine. And let's see. I'm just looking through my notes here. Um,
Of which you have quite a few.
yeah, well, it's just things are so different. Before the pandemic, I mostly did public speaking,
Yeah.
and just everything has changed. I still do some public speaking, but just my focus has both become more broad and more narrow, in the sense
Mhm.
that I'm doing a lot more work on the ground, and I'm working on issues that are broader than anyway. We'll get to that, but.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So yeah, as we were talking about before, most of you probably know me, through Steve, for atheism activism. I'm a former PR director for American Atheists. I was the host of um, Atheist Viewpoint for a few seasons, which is the nationally syndicated TV show that Madeline Murray O'Hair previously was the host of, and
Yeah.
it's a talk show. David Silverman was also previously the host of that show, and that was my show for a few seasons when I was on, syndicated in like 50 markets around the country on cable. But for a long time, I really did think and believed wholly that religion is the root of all evil. The Christopher Hitchens approach of religion poisons everything. And when we're talking about how to make the world a better place, you have to start there, because it's the trunk of the tree. And we can talk about this more if this is something you're interested in, but I've actually kind of moved away from that feeling.
Mhm.
I work today with churches more than I work with atheists in my day-to-day activism, and it's really interesting, that it's not churches, it's not religion, it's something different. I think it's really
Yeah.
more the difference between people um, who when they understand that they're hurting somebody, stop doing that,
Yeah.
and other people who, when they understand that they're hurting somebody, uh, get pleasure out of it, and that's the division. And religion exploits that about the people who have that view of the world, And that's why it's so evil, and it perpetuates that view and instills that and inculcates it into children too. Whereas atheism questions that idea, and I think there's a natural division there. But there are so many mosques that we're working with, and synagogues that we're working with, and churches that we're working with to operate Feed Louisville
Yeah.
and get meals to people. I can't look at this and say religion is bad. I just can't. I'm seeing too much good in the world from it with my own eyes.
There's I'm glad you mentioned, you brought that up, because yeah, I mean, the reason that I originally knew who you were was through your being a fellow member of the atheist secular community, and your sort of journey that you just described there is similar to mine,
Mm-hmm.
because I just sort of, I realized it's been quite a few years now, but
Yeah.
it was after I sort of became aware of the community, and like you said, sort of you go through the Christopher Hitchens phase where religion
Mm-hmm.
poisons everything, and then you're like, wait a minute, like there are, there are certain things about religion that I have a problem with, and there are certainly particular variants of religion, like particular groups that I have a huge problem with. But when you look around the world and you see people who are genuinely trying to do everything they can to make the world a better place, to feed the hungry, to house the unhoused, to educate the ignorant, to do whatever they can do to ease people's suffering and try to lift people up. And if our only major disagreement is whether or not there's a God, am I really going to fight this person, or am I going to try to be an ally to this person, and to try and get us all pulling in the same direction? Like, it just doesn't make any sense
Right.
to alienate people, or to cut yourself off from people who are doing genuine, for whatever their beliefs about the metaphysics of the universe and whether there was a creator. And I like, that's like a
Mm-hmm.
really fun intellectual argument to me. Like, if you're devoting your life to feeding the hungry, do I really care what you believe in terms of what happens to us after we die, or where this all came from? Not as a practical matter, I really don't.
Right. I think as long as you're doing the right things for the right reasons, then I have no criticism. But then we get into questions of what are the right things, and what are the right reasons. And if your religion tells you a certain framework of how to answer those questions, and it doesn't include skepticism
Yeah.
or or listening to the people who you're helping, and centering what their needs are. There are problems with religion where it is a top-down hierarchical thing that forces a view on people, and I certainly have criticisms of it that way, but I don't view it the same way as like you have to do it case by case. I don't look at it the same way that I look at like all cops are bastards by definition, because they represent state violence, and there's
Right.
just that's a division that cannot be, there's no such thing as a good cop. There just isn't. But religion, I'm not saying there's no such thing as a good or a bad religion. That's not really how I want to phrase it. There are religions that don't mind people asking questions and being skeptical and not believing in God, and being moral by your own understanding of what morality is by studying ethics,
Yeah.
that are still religions. Buddhism and Judaism, some forms of those religions, even the classical example of what Christians and atheists hate on, Islam and violence and stuff like that. We're working to feed people. I don't care. I really don't.
Yeah.
And yes, I have criticisms about forced hijab and stuff, but if you're feeding people, like, there's a pandemic, like, priorities.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying that's not important, but if someone is freezing to death and dying from starvation, that's what
Yeah.
I'm worried about today.
Exactly.
And I wanted to mention, just we were talking about, so I was aware of you and following your work way before we met.
Oh yeah.
So in 2012, I think, is when I first really got into your stuff. That sounds about right. When I was working for the Secular Student Alliance, I wrote a book for them about campus organizing, and I was
Okay.
looking up resources and stuff like that, and I found your channel, and it's great stuff. I remember there was a lot of criticism getting started around those days, 2013, 14, somewhere in there, following the elevator gate, about
Oh
atheism
yeah.
plus,
Oh
and
yeah.
about bringing social justice into atheism, and whether we were getting too far away from science and that sort of discussion, and and addressing too many things like white supremacy and
Hmm.
in our conferences, and you got a lot of criticism about being a feminist and being a social justice accomplice, and
Yeah.
I remember thinking, like, you know like, this is how things start. The people who,
Hmm.
in a few years, everybody's going to realize that this is the right way to go, because you're when you side against compassion, you always lose in the long run. You
Yeah.
just,
Well, I mean, it's a question of, and you sort of had this realization too, and your activism work kind of bears that out. It's like whatever movement, whatever community you identify as a part of, whether it's atheism, secularism, or any other, like if it's not if a concern for social justice is not a part of it, then it's basically just a circle jerk. Like, and I feel
Mhm.
like that's what the atheist community, that was like the choice that we were being offered back then,
Right.
when after Elevator Gate and the sort of the schism happened. It was like, do we want this to be something that to be a weapon that we can wield for good to try
Mhm.
and improve society, not just for atheists but for everybody, or do we
Right.
want this to just be a circle jerk where we
And,
sit around and we pat ourselves on the back for how smart we think we are? And there were a
yeah.
lot of people who just wanted it to be that, and
and
still
and
do.
I think really, even painting it as an academic kind of, circle jerk is ignoring a really important part of it, or downplaying an important part of it, I think,
Mhm.
of that this is a race issue specifically.
Oh,
by
absolutely.
by ignoring the social justice aspect, or downplaying the importance of that social justice aspect of this, what we're really saying is we want to keep this white men, you know audience at our conferences. That's really what they're saying, because conferences are for systemically racist reasons not terribly accessible to people of color,
Hmm.
even though religion harms a lot of people of color, and they know that, and they have questions about religion too, and they want to be interested in atheism, but they have other priorities, like we were talking about earlier, in their communities, that we're not addressing. And if you ask a lot of Black people who are atheists, why don't you talk more about atheism, and they're like, look around. Like, and it's just, it comes off as an unintentionally racist question, because it's
Yeah.
like you're not paying attention. And I think that's really what it is that, as we get a better understanding, we white people get a better understanding of how our spaces, by saying we're welcome to both sheep and wolves, only end up with wolves. That's
Yeah.
how that happens. We're self-selecting it that way, even if that's not our intent. But once we're aware of that, then we have to start incorporating these things. And by doing things like providing childcare at colleges, by doing things like addressing race issues in our talks, and making sure that we have a lot of people of color giving the talks and getting
Yeah.
paid appropriately and things like that, that is what makes the whole movement better. And anyway, it's really largely why I'll still, if somebody wants to hire me to speak about atheism, I will absolutely do it, and I do, and I have.
Hmm.
But I don't advertise myself as an atheist speaker anymore, and I don't like solicit speaking opportunities for that. And just because I'm trans, I think it's if we want to get into it, I guess, a lot of people assume that, like, I'm a trans activist, and like
Yeah.
that's, they want to hire me to talk about trans issues, and I'm happy to do it, and I will, and I do now more advertise myself as somebody who speaks on trans issues. But when I first started, when I came out, when I was working in American Atheists, this was in late 2014, early 2015, I was pretty clear about it. I said, I'm not an expert in this. I have no special knowledge about this, other than I happen to be trans, and I've been reading more about it than most people lately because of that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like I said, I haven't transitioned. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an advocate. I have a vested interest in trans activism being successful in society, but it's not my field. I know
Yeah.
about atheism, and if you want somebody to talk to you about trans issues, I can refer you to people. But um, that's actually changed a lot, because I'm realizing that the experiences that I've had over the last few years about not being able to transition medically because I can't access care that I need because of the cost, and
Hmm.
the harassment that I get as a public figure, who transitioned as a public figure like that. Those are issues that trans people face too, and that's part of the story too. And I've started telling that story a little bit more. And
Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to put in a little plug here too. If you're interested a little bit more about that kind of stuff and the stories of this of all of this stuff, I do have a podcast. It's on hiatus right now because with the pandemic. I'm working on other things, and other reasons. I was dealing with an abusive relationship and getting myself extricated from that around the time that I stopped doing that. And that's a whole other thing. But but there's one season of the show. It's free on iTunes and on Stitcher Radio, and it's called the Resist Podcast, and they're 1 hour long. It's kind of similar to this 1 hour long interviews where we just kind of talk about activism, and we talk about how they do what they do and why their cause is important and how you can get involved in this cause locally. And this beyond just saying, please donate to this nonprofit, but like actually what to do. And some previous guests that we had on the show. Margaret Huang, who's the executive director of Amnesty International, the executive director of American Atheists, Nick Fish, has been on the show. The executive director of the Trans Lifeline, Greta Gustavo Martala, has been on the show. But we also talk to. We kind of structure it like this. Every once in a while, like every 4 episodes, we have a high-profile guest, like Jamila Jamil from NBC's The Good Place, or we had Rose McGowan, the actress and the author of the book Brave, who accused Harvey Weinstein of rape and started. Fiona Apple has been on the show. Emmy Rossum from the Showtime show Shameless has been on the show. So we space them out. We do episodes like that with like an executive director level person or high profile activist. But the 3 episodes that we do the rest of the month are on the ground activists you've never heard of, grassroots people. And the whole point is that the big names draw people in, but then we want you to, when you're binging it, we want you to listen to these on the ground people who really know what they're doing and are actually doing it and have kids and have jobs, and they're, how they manage to get shit done despite anxiety, despite no time, despite no money, because it has to happen, and what you can do to get involved. Like I said, it's free on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. It's Patreon supported, so if you want to support the show, come to my Patreon. There's a lot of information there, and part of what I'm working on is getting that started back up now that we've kind of settled into a thing with this pandemic.
Sort of a new normal, yeah.
Yeah. But that's an important point, though, is that I don't want anybody to think of this as going back to normal or going back to the way things were, because the way things were was horribly bad for so many people. And, they're better now than they were a year ago. But it's like, we can't have this. What we learned from this is that there's just how many things we've been lied to about, people with disabilities cannot do certain jobs because, bullshit. You can do all these jobs you can do from home. You were lying this whole time. Now we know.
And we know that jobs, now. Yeah.
People are capable of doing their jobs without direct supervision from a manager. We already knew that. Now we have proof. Managers are not necessary, and neither are their salaries, and people can get their jobs done in 2 hours a day, and it's not necessary to be there for 8 hours plus the time commuting. We knew that already. Now we have proof. I hope that we don't go back to the way things were. It was very inefficient. There was a lot of class issues and a lot of race issues that played into it. We have a lot of opportunity to restructure things the way we really want them now. And that's actually a good segue into, if you want to talk about mutual aid.
Absolutely, I do want to. Well, I want to talk about. It's been on screen for the folks watching since we started. Feed Louisville, which is a mutual aid organization that you work with in Louisville. That is the charity that we've chosen for this, because every one of these shows I always ask my guest to choose an organization that we can encourage people to donate to, and obviously Feed Louisville is yours. So let's go for it. Talk about mutual aid and Feed Louisville specifically, and what it is that Feed Louisville does that is a little different and that maybe other communities could replicate.
Absolutely. I'm looking for So I've got like 16 pages of notes here, and I'm just looking for the parts that we were talking about with this. So let me just give you the elevator pitch about Feed Louisville and what it is. Feed Louisville is a nonprofit that a few of us helped get going here last year in Louisville, Kentucky, with the purpose of getting meals to unhoused people during the pandemic. So you know. Unhoused people tend to be hungry, but I want to make sure that we separate these two out, that there are a lot of people who have housing who also have food insecurity. We also help those people, but we primarily focus on unhoused people, just the way our system is structured of delivering meals. I don't want to downplay the importance of hunger and security among people with housing, but this is where we focus as a nonprofit. So, so what we do, we raise money and we organize networks of volunteers. That's what our organization does. So what we do with that money and that network of volunteers is we have a network of currently 14 restaurants in the Louisville area that we pay $2 per meal for them to, between the hours of about 2 and 4 p.m. when they're slow in the afternoon, that reduce capacity and everything anyway. So they will make up boxed to-go meals, 50 of them or 200 of them or however many they can do. And they're all the same, but they're nutritious, they're fresh, they're hot, they're, whatever leftover ingredients types things that they can come up with. So then we send our volunteers over, and if they give us 50 of them, we pay $2 per meal, so we'll give them $100, and then we take those 50 meals in our personal vehicles and go deliver them to unhoused people around the city, at traffic corners and in camps and stuff who need hot food. And we've been doing this every single day, minimum 500, sometimes over 1,000 every single day since last April. It's all funded by just individual people who are giving us money. Recently, we were approved for 501c3 status, so we're now able to offer tax receipts if people want to do it that way and get a tax write-off for it. But it's all privately funded. We very, very recently are in the process of hiring our first employee to manage it, because it's just too much work for volunteers to do and have this work for the scale of how we need it. But so that's what Feed Louisville is. If you want to support Feed Louisville, we highly encourage it. Every single dollar literally goes directly to the ingredients. I mean, the restaurants are not making money off of this. This just lets them pay their staff a little bit of something and make some of the money back from the ingredients so that they're not losing money doing it. But nobody's getting rich here. This is literally just feeding unhoused people during a pandemic. I mean, even if you can just give $10, that's 5 meals that like today will feed people literally. So thank you for your interest in this. If you want to Venmo, it's feed-Louisville. If you want to get in touch on Facebook and see other ways that you can help or talk to us organizing this, it's Feed Louisville on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram. And it's a great organization. Please help. If you want to replicate this idea in another city, that's something that I can help you do. We are currently working to set something similar up in Toledo, Ohio, and the idea is to replicate this in other cities as well. So if that's something you're interested in doing, for real, please get in touch. That we're looking for people. But I'm just looking at my notes here. So I do want to talk a little bit about what mutual aid is, and what that means. So mutual aid is, well, it's basically asking the question about, okay, like, how can I use my privilege to challenge barriers for the people in my community who struggle to meet their needs? And it doesn't mean giving money away necessarily. It can, but it's very distinct from charity. Charity has this kind of concept of this, well, first of all, it's in a class structure. You have the rich people giving to the poor people. It usually comes with strings attached, like it's only for women or it's only for people with children or whatever, which is, we know from multiple economic impact studies that is not the most efficient way to allocate money when you're trying. I mean, basic income type of things work much better. If you let people decide for themselves what to spend money on, it helps much more. Strings attached are just, they're not helpful, but it also tends to be for the benefit of the rich person in the sense of makes them feel better, or it makes them right in the eyes of God, or or they get a tax write-off, or if they get a better reputation with their circle. It's not really what necessarily is the most, they don't ask the question, what do you actually need? They say, here's what I want to do, that I have this pet project idea that I think sounds like a good idea, but they don't ask the question, what do you need? And it's not helpful. Mutual aid is more about asking, what do you need? How can I help meet that need?
Hmm.
Because of my privilege, and it could mean giving money if your privilege is that you're loaded. But if your privilege is that you have a lot of friends who own houses and have things like lawnmowers and have things, and you have somebody who doesn't have a lawnmower but they need to mow their lawn, you can use your privilege by saying on Facebook, hey, does anybody have a lawnmower we can buy? That's a way to do that. That's what
Yeah.
mutual aid is. It's not about bartering. It's not transactional. You don't keep track. It's a community effort to make sure everybody's needs are met, and using privilege that you have to account for the lack of privilege that other people don't. It's not bartering. It's not a substitute for currency. In fact, we don't participate in the mutual aid sense in capitalism at all, unless there's no other way to get what we need to meet a certain need. But the effort is to do it without having to engage in capitalism.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and it's not, if you think about it, it's not it's not an unfamiliar or unusual thing. It's just that
right.
we usually we in our everyday lives, those of us who aren't as fully involved in mutual aid as you are, or as other people are, you do this sort of thing for your friends, for your family,
Sure.
but the idea of mutual aid is you take that willingness to help out because you can help and because someone needs help, and you expand it beyond your personal circle, and you
Right.
find the people in your community who are in need, and you say, I'm going to treat them the same way I would treat, if a friend of mine was
Yep.
hungry and didn't have
Yep.
any food.
What
uh,
you're describing in philosophy is called compassion.
yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah,
right,
that's the
I
that's the
mean,
technical
right,
term.
yeah, but I mean, like,
Exactly.
this is exactly the difference. I think, like, serious. I'm being
Yeah.
totally serious about this. Like,
Yeah.
what we're talking about here is people on the right. They do care very much about their family's needs being met. They love their family. They would protect their family with any resources that they had that were necessary to do that. They're humans too. The problem is that they consider the only people worthy of that compassionate protection to be people like themselves,
Yeah.
and people they see as extensions of themselves, like and people that they consider property to them, like their families. They
Yeah.
don't have that larger sense of compassion for like humanity as a whole, and regardless of what color skin they are, what country they came from, or what language they speak, or those types of things. And that's really the root of this issue, I think, is just and I think I want to mention this because I think a lot of people just don't know this. And in terms of like the science behind how compassion works, compassion is a skill. You get better at it with practice. There are scientifically designed like apps and workshops and things like that at MIT and places where you can become more compassionate because they've studied how to make people more compassionate. and
Mhm.
and it works. This is like the way that your brain works as you become less egocentric. Like children naturally are egocentric until they learn that other people have, it's theory of mind, that other people have internal consciousness and have wants and
Yeah.
desires and pain just like they do. But it's a stage of growth of child development that is stunted in a lot of people because of abusive, emotionally abusive upbringings and things that they're not even aware of those patterns affecting them as adults, and therapy can help and so on. But I mean, really, that's what we're describing, is just compassion in action. That's what mutual aid is. And I mean, we talked about one example of a lawnmower, but there's so many more ways to engage in mutual aid. So there's something called a mutual aid house, which is where I live. I don't pay rent here, and the
Mhm.
way that this is structured, I do the cooking. So if I make dinner for everybody who permanently lives here, but we also regularly have people come who, queer people, unhoused people who just need a hot meal. I make a lot of like nice Italian food from scratch that I learned how to make from my grandmother. I do that every day.
Mhm.
And there's this ideal that like people who are unhoused should be happy with like a bologna sandwich, and sometimes that's all we can afford to make sure everybody gets some food. But unhoused people deserve a nice sit down from scratch Italian dinner just as much as
Of
everybody else,
course.
especially during a pandemic. And that's something I try to provide for people here. And we have 4 couches, and we take safety precautions as much as we can with COVID and things. But if people need a place to crash, that's what we do. We have clean needles, we have free Plan B, we have free
Hmm.
condoms, we have free toothbrushes, and we help people sign up for Medicaid, we help people sign up for therapy, and like that's what this household is. And there are mutual aid houses like this all over the country. I also am working with one in Toledo too.
Hmm.
That I mean, if you have extra bedrooms right now, a lot of people are consolidating housing, and there's a lot of empty houses and stuff. The one where oops, the one the one in Toledo, like there's currently my friend runs, she's currently housing an unhoused teenage girl there.
Hmm.
And if you have empty bedrooms, there are things that you can do to help, whether that's storing supplies for contactless drop-offs and pickups, or for somebody else who needs a place to store them, or if you can offer housing to somebody like that. Seriously, that is something
Yeah.
that you can do. Like it's not, people think that's like, but that happens all the time. And if you're going to do something like that, this is the time to do it.
Yeah. Well, and there's like the idea that the difference between something like a mutual aid organization
Mhm.
and the way like maybe more conservative or right wing people sort of view charity or helping the less fortunate. There's this idea. I think one of the problems and one of the barriers in a lot of people's minds that keeps them from being as interested or even just as supportive for something like mutual aid is we've been inculcated in our culture for as long as anyone watching this can remember, and a lot longer than that,
Yeah.
that everything is automatically commodified.
Hmm.
And if you help a poor person, if you help a homeless person or a person who is hungry or whatever, you sort of, a lot of people just instinctively view that as like a capital investment, and you're looking at it in terms of, well, what am I going to get back for this?
Yep.
you know and
Yeah.
and and it's like, that's not, if you let go of that and you just look at it as, people are in need, and the best way to help them is to figure out what their need is and then figure out how to supply it. And
Yeah.
that's it. No means testing, no strings attached, no like, well, I'll give you, if I'll help you out, but first you need to do X, Y, and Z. Like, if you just let go of that and say, no,
Yeah.
if people are in need, let's just give them what they need
Right.
and then
The
go
the
from
whole
there.
tough love idea is something very much born out of this, I think, this evangelical idea of like the prosperity gospel plays into it.
Yeah.
And this whole there was a booklet about this in the 1800s. I'm trying to remember what it was called. That basically this just idea of, if you work hard, God will reward you.
Hmm.
And if you're not being rewarded, it's because you're lazy or something. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like, yeah. And every study that we've done on this, basic income experiments, and like housing first program. So I was on the
Yeah.
Commission for Human Rights when I used to live in Columbia, Missouri, and this is something that we pushed for there. So Utah, in Utah, excuse me, Salt Lake City specifically, was able to drop their rate of chronic homelessness by 91% in one policy change.
Yeah.
All they did was just make housing available for free to unhoused people.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's not complicated, but the thing is, though, it saves money. It's cheaper to do this. The reason it's cheaper is that it costs more money in public services, in police services, in EMS services to have somebody chronically homeless than it does to just pay their rent for them. And
Yeah.
they found out that if you just do this, people end up not needing the government to pay their rent anymore. They once they have housing first, that's the name of the housing first.
Yeah.
If you approach it that way, they can get clean if that's an issue. They can get a job if that's an issue. A lot of unhoused people have jobs, and then they don't need help anymore.
Yeah.
And it's like, we just need to approach it as, it's not transactional, it's not conditional. Housing is something people have to have because they're here, and we owe it to them as a society. If we have
Yep.
6 empty houses for every unhoused person, we owe it to them to reconcile those two figures. And that figure, by the way, that I just quoted is true and is 2 years old. There is
Yeah.
much more empty housing per unhoused person now than there was, because people have consolidated housing and they've built more housing since then and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It really is. I mean, it's just it's approaching that issue from the opposite end,
Mhm.
and realizing that that it's just a better solution. I mean, and
Yeah.
because like you just, because I know a little bit about this too, because I did a video about this a couple months ago, and
Hmm.
I cited that Utah program as a major part of that video because it's one of the more prominent housing first programs that have
Right.
been implemented, and has been like a long term thing, and has shown rewards, to the community. And yeah, and if you think about it for 5 seconds,
Yeah.
it makes all the sense in the world. It's like,
Right.
if you had a drug problem or a drinking problem or some other thing that you wanted to deal with, or if you needed, you had some kind of a healthcare issue that you were struggling, would you do you think it would be easier or more difficult to deal with that if you had a place to live? I mean, it makes
Hmm.
it's like, how do you expect a person who needs to find a job who wants to get clean how do you expect them to do these incredibly challenging things and also not have a place to stay? Like, it
In
makes
a
it, in a
pandemic, they
pandemic
can't
in
wash
a
their hands.
pandemic
They can't do, like, are you fucking kidding me?
it's like
It's just
it's
like
a
they want them to suffer.
yeah
They
it's
take
what
pleasure in their suffering. I
it
really
yeah
think it's sadism. I genuinely do. I think people who vote for Trump, I think they're actually sadists. I think that they get
I think that's a lot of it.
pleasure.
I agree with you.
Yeah, it's a sign of psychopathy. They genuinely, I think, like, it's, and this is something that psychopaths unfortunately don't tend to seek treatment, but like, this is something that can be improved with therapy if you understand that sadism could be considered a bad thing and society sees it that way, and it's better for humanity if we don't consider sadism acceptable. Therapy can help with this. If you have this idea that other people's suffering or other people's humiliation is pleasurable for you, like outside of a consensual sexual thing, that's not what I'm talking about.
Right,
But
yeah.
I'm talking about just societally. If somebody's, if humiliation or suffering is not causing you to see something wrong with this, that's like a mental health problem.
Yeah.
And I think that comes just from, you know this society's view of the acceptability of emotional abuse to children, and the way that this just plays forward, and people think that these kinds of things are okay. And I'm really encouraged by, we're seeing a lot of memes these days about therapy, and like, there's this joke about, like, Generation X type people are like, I heard she went to therapy. And
Hmm.
it's like, but 18-year-olds on Twitter are like, guess what my therapist said today? And that's really, really good.
It's great.
People, and
Yeah.
people are understanding that these kinds of things matter, and that it's okay to talk about these things, and improving yourself is a good thing, and processing your emotions is a good thing, and toxic masculinity is bad, and sadism is bad. And
Yeah.
I have hope for the future about this, but like, but I really think that, like, that's really what, as activists, at the core of the problem is what we need to address is just people not they genuinely don't see a problem with unhoused people suffering. They just don't see the problem with that, so they
Hmm.
don't have any motivation or incentive to try to change it.
Yeah.
Even if you present them, even if you present them with proof that it saves tax money to do it, and they're always arguing about low taxes, it's worth it to them because they want unhoused people to suffer.
Yeah.
And that's what we're up against. And I think, it's terrible, but I think understanding the root problem is the only way that we can address it.
I think like I said, I agree with you, but
Mhm.
I think a lot of it is also complacency,
Yeah.
and that's something that I see, that I get frustrated with that, on. I mean, that more so on the Democrat side, and sort of the
Mhm.
more, not people on the far left, because people on the far left are typically a lot more activist, but people who are, more toward the center, and who are left leaning, it's not so much sadism as it is complacency and apathy, where they're just like, well,
Mhm.
like, yeah, I would like to help, but I don't know if we can go that far. I would like to,
Right.
I think we need to address this problem, but we can't do that much.
Mhm.
And I mean, there's sort of you run into that, you get there's a line between being pragmatic and just and letting that tip over into fatalism, where it's just like, well, we'll never be able to fix this.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
I'm completely in favor of being pragmatic and saying, look, let's try to do something that we can actually accomplish. That's
Hmm.
great, but once we accomplish that, now we need to set our feet and keep going, right? And that's the
Yeah.
only way we'll actually make things better. But
Hmm.
there's a lot of sort of looking at things as they are, because a lot of these problems have become so normalized, because poverty has become so normalized in this country,
Yeah.
because people working for inadequate wages has been normalized
Yeah.
for
Well,
multiple
it's just
generations
inequality
now.
has gotten so much worse too,
Yeah,
that it's just that is normal for most
yeah,
people, is that they're poor, you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's like, and so it's difficult to break through that, even
Hmm.
for people who aren't sadistic, even for people who don't vote for Trump or who don't vote Republican, who actually,
Right.
if you bring it to their attention, they will have compassion for
Right.
people who don't have homes, for people who are
Hmm.
going hungry. But it's just like, but what are we supposed to do when the problem
Right.
is this big? And sometimes it is like, it can be as simple as taking what we have been doing for decades and just flipping it and saying, let's do this, but let's get rid of the means testing, let's get rid of the
Yeah.
conditions,
The things
let's
that the
yeah,
economists and the people who study this tell us don't work.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
yeah, I think people just really underestimate how much of public policy is drafted by capitalists and funded by like capitalists through think tanks that say whatever they want them to.
hmm,
And Biden, I mean, he nor Harris, neither of them were in my top five in the
right,
primary, And of course I voted for Biden because I live in Kentucky. It's not like my vote means anything in the presidential race,
right,
but it's just it's harm reduction, right?
sure,
You do the most that you can with the resources and the time that you have. You don't beat yourself up for not doing more than that, but you have to understand that this is a multi-generational thing. You will not live to see the results that you want. You won't,
hmm,
but that's okay. You make
it's
it
the way
better
it is,
now.
yeah,
You make it. It's the starfish thing, Like if you haven't heard the story, I'm sure everybody has, but it's true. So you got the guy walking along the beach and he's throwing all these starfish washed up onto the beach one at a time, and there's a million of them, and another guy walks up to him and goes like, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "I'm saving these starfish." And he's like, "You're never going to save all of them before they dry out, right?" He goes, "It's what difference does it make?" And he throws another one. He goes, "Well, it made a difference to that one."
yeah,
you know Seriously though, I mean, that's really how I view it. Is there, and this is partly, it does take, I think, a certain amount of privilege to be able to get involved in upper level politic type things, and to, like, I
hmm,
understand that you can make bigger changes that way, but to be able to raise the money that's necessary to get involved in those conversations, and have people take you seriously and stuff like that, it takes a degree of privilege to be able to do that, to be able to pay
absolutely,
attention to that level stuff.
oh
Your
yeah,
basic needs have to be met, and you have to, like, to be able to go to DC and to be able to get on meetings with people like this, you have to have a certain amount of privilege. And I have frankly been giving less and less of a shit about federal level politics since, well, really since Biden won. I don't
hmm,
care anymore. I don't pay attention to that level of politics news because I'm too focused on local things. And it's a balance that I've chosen because I trust that they're doing the best that they can, given that this is a capitalist society, and that I'm not going to be happy with the outcome regardless. But it's better than it was, and that's to my satisfaction for now. I'm more focused on making sure that the people tonight are getting dinner. Well, I mean, seriously, literally tonight. And like, I just we have a lot of work to do. The climate is obviously a major issue in terms of the long-term probability of success of any multi-generational fight like this.
hmm,
But um, like, I think it's really just mutual aid, like we were talking about, is really just about finding the way that you can help the most, and doing the most that you can with the privileges that you have, and addressing the needs of the people around you, without judgments, just no judgment, just
hmm,
compassion, and making everybody's lives better that way, and it makes your life better to do that. Actually, we mentioned Buddhism earlier.
Yeah.
There's an article. If you go to DalaiLama.com, I think it is. It's his official website. But there's a so he posts articles regularly on there of speeches that that he has given, and it's actually the 14th Dalai Lama, the current guy. I mean, he is the head of a religion,
Yeah.
but he's actually quite a scientifically minded guy. He doesn't try to make his arguments using religious reasoning at all when he can help it. And he makes an argument on there. There's an article I read recently on his site with a speech about how practicing compassion, because when you do it, it's been scientifically proven to make you happier, and pursuing your own happiness is in an argument, a logical argument that he lays out, is the meaning of life. And he says that if you can make yourself happy while improving the lives of others, that as the meaning of life, and this is why you should be compassionate as much as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And like, he makes the argument that being compassionate to other people is the meaning of life. And it's just like, I really can't argue with his logic the way he presents it, actually.
Yeah.
But
well, it makes, I've told that to people too. It's like, it's, if for no other reason than because it makes your own life better, like being kind to people as much as you can. I mean, obviously there's, you're always going to run into people that are just assholes that are abusive. And, I've never been like, well, kill them with kindness type of person. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes somebody just needs to get lit up. Right. But in general, as you go through your life overall, I mean, if you can be kind to people, if you can be nice to people, if you can try your best to be sensitive and understanding to others, I mean, it not only does it lead you to treat other people better, but it makes your own life better.
Really,
like,
it does.
there's no reason not to make the effort. No reason at all.
And on top of that, the other things that people espouse to care about as values of theirs, like saving money on taxes and things, it also saves tax money to do the types of policies that we're talking about. People who are very, very poor cost the government money. I read somewhere, I don't know how old this figure is and how exactly it was calculated, I don't recall, but it was a government publication that said you have to earn something like $72,000 a year in terms of how much you pay in property taxes and in income taxes and in sales taxes on things you buy and stuff before you are actually not costing the government money.
Right.
So, like, it makes sense for us to make people's lives better such that they can earn incomes like that by practicing engaging in the economy rather than being sick and being just having disabilities that make them not able to work full time and not earn the wages that they have a potential to. And I'm in favor of eliminating the the wage theory of labor altogether and divorcing people's standard of living from what they do for a living and do with their time. But that's a separate thing.
Sure.
But in the capitalistic society that we live in, we are making people's lives harder at expense to ourselves. And it costs more in taxes to do it the way that we're doing it. The reason that we do it this way is because capitalists are making huge amounts of profit by sustaining the system this way, by starting wars so that they can make bombs to sell to the government and pocket the profit from manufacturing those, by incarcerating people just hypocritically, needlessly, in a racist manner for no purpose during a pandemic, just because they make profit off of it. And one of the criticisms that I had of Harris when she was running, excuse me, I've got apple in my teeth, when she was running for president, and still as vice president, one of the reasons that I said I would never support her is because of her prison leasing history of doing this. Of you're not. I mean, this is basically slavery is what we're talking about, where you have prisoners who are being leased out to work for companies who are getting paid pennies an hour, who get shot if they try to leave, who are being, like, because they're under contract for this, even though their sentence ends, are being forced to stay and work under threat of getting shot. Until their contract is over. This is fucking slavery.
And it's for private companies. You can't even make the argument that they're doing
$bucks an hour, whatever they're paying, 16 cents an hour. And and this is how this works, is that, like, I mean, she's a prosecutor. She's on the side of the government when it comes to state violence and stuff like this. It's just, it's just mind blowing. But she's still better than Trump. It's a low
Yeah.
bar, but it's a bar.
I
So
I
yeah,
used to I haven't gotten into it for a while because I've just gotten to the point. I mean, after 4 years of Trump, it I just got kind of exhausted with arguing with people who I knew were going to give me a fight as far as politics. But like, I've probably mentioned it in videos before, at least, that like when it gets on my nerves when people say, well, I'm socially liberal. I'm socially progressive, but I'm fiscally conservative. As though there's no moral component to that. It's like, and I
right,
would I would try to argue people and to say like, you act like saying, well, I don't believe in, I believe in lower taxes for the wealthy, and I believe in deregulation, blah blah blah. It's like you're basically saying that you would rather incredibly, like, unfathomably wealthy people get to keep more of their money than you would the government spend some of that money on helping those who are the most desperate in need.
right,
And I
and
do not see how that is not a moral argument. And I
right,
don't see how that's morally defensible. But they
right.
they
Well,
hide
they
behind like,
make
oh, it's
the
fiscal conservatism.
right. They make the argument like that it interrupts their autonomy of how to do this. That if that they're not against rich people helping poor people with their money, but the system of doing this by forcing them to do it under threat of arrest and deciding on behalf of rich people where their money goes in programs. That's the
Mhm.
issue. And you're like, okay, but see, what we're missing here is the context of what I was talking about earlier about how charity is actually not a good system either.
Mhm.
What they always say is we should do it through private charity, but it's like, no, because you're missing the point. Private charity has all of these problems
Yeah.
of classism and strings attached. It's all the same shit that you're talking about is a problem, that we are talking about as a problem of actually not really meeting people's needs in the best way to meet their needs. It's still rich people calling the shots here as a form of social control and imposing their will on other people, even
Yeah.
though we didn't agree to this and
Yeah.
and wouldn't if I mean, we're talking about like 644 people that are making these are
Yeah.
physical human beings. They have addresses. They're like
Yeah.
like, no, I'm serious. Like, if
Yeah.
you pulled this kind of shit in 1802, you could expect a group of your neighbors to come to your house and just mantle your house piece by piece and set it on fire. Like, that's literally what would happen. Like, there are many historical accounts of this happening to politicians.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the way, they invented the Secret Service, and then they started getting bigger guns and
But
outlawing smaller guns for civilians, and now they can do whatever they want.
but they didn't get protested at restaurants.
Oh
That's the
no!
real oppression when a politician who has made it like their public career to try and fuck the most
Yep,
vulnerable members of our society, if they get yelled at by some folks at a restaurant, well, that's just it's the fall of civilization.
right.
I want to mention we're in about the last 10 minutes or so of the show. If anybody watching has questions for us, throw them in the live chat. And also, there's a beautifulist one asked a question a little bit ago that I saw that I felt would be at least worth addressing. A beautifulist one says, would either of you consider it sadistic psychopathy if I took pleasure in the humiliation and downfall of Trump and his followers?
Well, that's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
So I would be interested in your answer to this too.
Oh.
But I mean, in a technical definition, yes, it's if you take pleasure in somebody else's humiliation, that is sadism. Now, whether that's morally acceptable in the sense of punching Nazis,
Mhm.
but I mean, yeah, it's kind of like the way I think of this is the way that
Yeah.
I think of that woman. I'm blanking on her name. She was a sniper in World War II. And
Okay. Yeah.
she has like 300 and something, 42 or something confirmed kills. And people asked her about this, about if she feels bad for killing Nazis. And she's like, no. Every time I shoot a Nazi, I am saving lives.
Hmm.
And it's not a bad thing. I am saving people's lives every time I pull the trigger, and that's how I feel about it. It's like, I mean, I'm not. Just to be clear, I'm
Yeah.
not threatening the life of the president. I'm not. I don't own any guns. This isn't something that I would do.
Right.
But I do want to say that in the sense of people who cannot be stopped any other way, who have power and they're using that power to hurt people, and they're at such a stage of narcissism that there is no possible way for even therapists to get through to them, that it is not a moral thing for them to continue doing what they're doing, and they're going to do it because they have the power and the money to do it. We should not feel bad about being glad that that is stopped. And it's one thing to take like delight in him being humiliated. I think, but I think we can be elated genuinely in this no longer being something that people are suffering from.
Absolutely.
And I think if we make that distinction, then I feel good about it.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at with it. I mean, I always say, and I said this a lot back a couple years ago when we were really talking about the Nazi punching thing
Yeah.
regularly. I was coincidentally right around the time that Trump was inaugurated. Uh, I put it this way. I say, if something terrible happens to a terrible person, I am not going to lose any sleep over that. And I'm certainly not going to go into all of this performative bullshit about like, oh, but we need to be able to agree to disagree. And oh, yes, he
Right.
was a terrible person, but I'm not going to take pleasure in his suffering. I mean, yeah, maybe it's a little bit different if you're like actively reveling in it and you're like devoting a lot of emotional time and a
Mhm.
lot of your day to like really, really taking pleasure in the suffering of another person, however awful they are. Maybe at some point that crosses a line. But like, the example I always used was because like Richard Spencer got his lights knocked out,
Yeah.
and somebody said like, like, but isn't it, or don't isn't it wrong to punch people? And I'm like, yeah, it's wrong to punch people. I'm not saying everybody go out and start punching people willy nilly, but it's wrong to run somebody over with your lawnmower too. But if
Mhm.
somebody ran over Richard Spencer with a lawnmower, do you really think I'm going to be upset about it? I'm
Yeah.
not. Like,
I
I'm
mean,
just not. I don't if shitty things happen to shitty people, I don't feel like there are some people that are so bad and have committed so many crimes, officially or unofficially, have caused so much suffering that there's literally nothing that could happen to them that would make me feel bad for them. I mean,
yeah.
I might not take positive pleasure in it, but
Mhm.
there's no way they're going to get an ounce of sympathy from me. Like
Yeah.
you've I'm sorry, you have
Right.
fucked up too much in your life. You're not going to get any sympathy from me, you
I
know?
think it depends on how the question is worded. If you're taking
Yeah.
delight in the person's downfall, go right ahead,
Yeah,
because the
okay, yeah.
downfall means they're losing their privilege and their power and their money and their ability to inflict oppression on others. Take delight in that. Taking delight in somebody's, humiliation or pain is sadism. But if it goes with the territory. If you're going to, if losing privilege hurts you, good. You shouldn't have had it in the first
Right.
place. That's what privilege means. And it's like with training animals. Operant
Mhm.
conditioning. You talk about positive punishment and negative punishment and positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. And like a dog cannot tell the difference in terms of the response to behavior. If you want to diminish a behavior, there's
Mhm.
two ways to do it. You can apply something bad, like you can say no, or you can
Right.
take away something good, like remove a bone that they were chewing on if they're doing something not supposed to do. And the dog either way diminishes the behavior.
Yeah.
But the point is, like, I if we can stop him by taking away his privilege, we should delight in that, because he's using it to hurt people. And that's not the same thing as taking delight in his personal pain, but it is just kind of how it works, that
Yeah.
if you take pleasure, as he does, in using your privilege to hurt people, that you will feel pain in losing that privilege. Sorry,
Yeah.
but I don't feel bad about that.
No, that is a good distinction to make, especially when you're talking about someone who is losing something that they were never entitled to begin
Which
with.
is that's
You
literally
know.
definition
Yeah.
is half the
Yeah.
definition of privilege, I should
Yeah,
say. Yeah.
exactly.
The other side of that coin, privilege does two things, right? One thing is it's unearned advantages that you should not have, that other people don't have. The other side of it is that it blinds you to the suffering of people who lack that privilege. You
Mhm.
don't see it. You are unaware of it. Even if people tell you about it, you might not believe it. You might just say, like, like we were talking about this Wendy's thing earlier, which we actually quite get into, but yeah, like this idea that that you were saying that, like, you couldn't believe this happened, and, like, it's just so horrible, and like, who could talk to somebody like that? Actually, like, women will tell you that happens
It
every
happens all the
day,
time.
like literally every
Yeah.
day. And it's just that men don't ever think they're going to be held accountable for it, and they don't remember it. And they don't think of it as a big deal. It's not that women don't. It's not that women think of it as a big deal differently. It's just you know it's more just that we're used to it.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a misogyny factor here, in the sense that it's a much worse thing to call somebody fat if they're a woman, and if it's coming from a man
Yeah.
versus a different situation. But yeah, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Well, there's another question from the chat. This
Sure.
Dana wants to know, would you call yourself an anarchist? Why or why not?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I am. I'm an anarcho-communist, if you want to be specific. But anarchy really just means that, well, it means that it doesn't mean a lack of structure. It doesn't mean a lack of rules. It doesn't mean no rules at all. It doesn't mean anything goes. It means that you respect the autonomy, and you respect the authenticity and of other people individually, and that you create communities that have social norms and policies and things that you want to create. And it also rejects things like hierarchies. It rejects things like forcing people in any way to participate in a system of self-governance on a local level that they aren't choosing for themselves to be part of.
Right.
And yeah, absolutely, I agree very much with the principles of anarchy, and identify as an anarcho-communist if you want to talk about the details of that. But yeah, I've read a lot of theory about it. Like I mentioned before, if anybody wants book recommendations on this kind of stuff, I'm happy to put a list together and so on. But yeah, Conquest of Bread is a good one. Let's see, Communist Manifesto, obviously. But I'll put together a list, and I'll send it to Steve.
Yeah. And here's another question from some random geek, a fellow anarchist of yours, who says, wants to know, wants to know how you feel about Kamala Harris sending trans women to male prisons. This was when she was the AG
Yeah,
of California.
right. I mean, obviously that's totally unacceptable and cruel, and it blows my mind that it took her so long to apologize, even after she understood that there are problems with this. But problems with this, that's one way to put it.
That's putting it mildly.
Yeah,
There are certain
like
problems with
this
this.
whole, like the trans bathroom thing. So this personally affects me. I travel a lot for what I do. I just got back from Memphis and Nashville, working with some activists in those cities, and it's something that I don't use public bathrooms like that unless it's an absolute emergency, because I don't want to get arrested or beat the fuck up. And
Yeah.
the thing is, people don't know this, but this is also true, that spironolactone, which is one of the transitioning medications that's like, it's not all trans women take medication to transition. Not all trans women take the same medications for this, depends on your individual medical situation. But by far, one of like the two most common transitioning drugs, spironolactone, is a diuretic. It makes you have to pee all the fucking time.
Yeah.
It's just not a joke, this is a real problem. And I live in Kentucky, and going to Tennessee, and going to well, I guess it was just in Tennessee anyway. But anyway, it's just, yeah, it's dangerous. And it's, I don't know. I'm sorry, I lost track of what we were just talking about for a second. We were talking about trans people and traveling, and how did we get on that topic?
Well, it was, the original question was about Kamala Harris and the sending trans women to men's
No,
prison.
right. That's absolutely unfathomably cruel. And I'm really glad that society has gotten to a place where, I mean, like, I think it was 2014 when Laverne Cox from Orange is the New Black was on the cover of Time magazine, and the title was "The Transgender Tipping Point" of that cover article, and that was compared to the 1996 cover of Newsweek when Ellen DeGeneres had her coming out with the "Yep, I'm Gay" title article. And that kind of started the conversation among non-trans people about the social acceptability of mocking trans women and trans men and non-binary people as an acceptable form of humor and things like media representation. It's when those conversations started about people on Medicaid being able to access transitioning care and stuff like that. Obviously, activists have been working on this for a very long time,
Mhm.
but getting that into mainstream, that is non-trans discussion spaces, to getting that discussion is something that people are really having. That I mean, I don't want to say it was a product of her time. It's she was in line with the policies that her constituents expected of her. I think it's really shitty. If she had listened to activists at the time, she probably
Yeah.
would have made different decisions. One of the reasons that I liked Elizabeth Warren a lot more, although she's not my favorite either, I mean, they're all capitalists. They're all participating in a system of capitalism that, you know, with a police state, with prisons, with a lot of things I disagree with. None
Right.
of them are actually socialists. None of them are, you know what I mean?
Right.
But
But on the
but
sliding scale.
yeah, but on a
Yeah.
sliding scale, one of the reasons I liked Elizabeth Warren a lot more than the others at the top of that was because she's so teachable.
Hmm.
She wanted to learn what she was doing wrong and listens to activists and wants to center what their needs are. And that's so important in politicians
Yeah.
and so rare in politicians, because in order to get to positions of power, you have to have a lot of egocentricity and you have to be willing to do whatever rich people want. And it's just you're not able to become president of the United States unless you're willing to play ball with people who are like weapons manufacturers and people who were like private prison I mean, that's how that works. That's how you get hundreds of millions of dollars into super PACs to make this happen.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm hoping for is addressing a lot of the corruption and the sources of financing for campaigns. But as long as people get elected that way, they're never going to fix it for real, because that's how they got there in the first place. And it's
Yeah.
that's another thing to work on. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Radical change in topic. Dana also wants to know about your. I think that I'm pretty sure they're Playmate Star Trek figures there behind your plate there. I know it looks
Oh,
like one of
yes.
them is Geordi and the other one kind of tipped over. It looked, was that
Yep.
Deanna there?
That is, yes.
Yeah.
Those are my two favorite characters. Yeah. So Geordi LaForge. So this, I mean, it was. I know you're huge into Star Trek. I love Star
Indeed.
Trek too. I grew up with the Next Generation, and when I do video interviews and stuff, I have my little corner over here with interesting things. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, seriously. I have these. Geordi is. I loved that they had a black man as the chief engineer. That was
Hmm.
so. I mean, just I mean, it was. I thought that was such a good representation of Gene Roddenberry's vision of the original Star Trek, of representation of people in positions of power and authority who white Americans were not normally seeing. And when we picture what the future is going to be like, that black people are just as capable, of course. And he's a good engineer. He's
Yeah.
he's more conservative about following the rules and things than than Scotty,
Then
but
Scotty was, yeah.
yeah, but I mean, but he's very competent. He has a disability, yet he's incredibly good. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
He's amazing, and I'm really proud of. And also LeVar Burton himself. I mean,
Oh,
obviously,
he's amazing.
as an
Yeah.
actor, I mean, Roots. If you've never seen Roots, by the way, like you should do that. Literally, like you're late
Yeah,
because
you
you
should
missed
watch it
it
like tonight.
already. You should watch it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
I mean, you can't watch
it's
it all tonight. It's really
yeah.
long, but watch the first
There's
episode tonight.
yeah, but there's a book. It's right there. Anyway, Roots. So there's the Autobiography of Malcolm X, as told to Alex Haley.
Mm.
You should read that too. Malcolm X, of course, the activist from the '60s who was assassinated. And Alex Haley is the author of Roots.
Yeah.
So yeah, highly recommend both of those in terms of the historical context of slavery in this country, and then the same guy explaining this in modern terms. It's 50, 60 years now, but that's a really great book too. But yeah, and then of course. Counselor Troy, who in the first couple seasons, they had her in the bunny suit, and it was she was very clearly there for a specific reason, to appeal to a certain type of audience watching science fiction for that reason. And in the old Star Trek, they had a lot of aliens who were like super sexy, and that was like part of what drew people to sci-fi, and why people liked, like in the 40s and 50s and in the magazine serials and stuff, when sci-fi was getting started as a genre, the like erotic type ideas about what we're going to find on other planets, and that was part of the appeal for these teenage boys who were buying these magazines. But that had, by the 90s, by 87, was it, when Star Trek Next Generation came out, we were starting to have more conversations about this is not appropriate, to view women officers this way. And
Yeah.
and I thought it was just the reason I have this one of her in her commander's
In her uniform. Yeah.
yeah, is because that was an important part of her character development, and as an actress, something that she wanted and asked for on the show. She's like, my character is Lieutenant Commander. I'm the same rank as Data. Why the fuck am I wearing this?
Right.
And so they came up with the plot point of her getting her commander's promotion and starting to wear a uniform. And I thought that was just fantastic. And she's brilliant. She brings a lot to the crew in terms of a level head and mental health and listening to people's needs and things that are very valuable to me. And so I have the two of them there to represent that and remind me of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I for anybody, and people who regularly watch know, but way back behind me here, that's my, because those are like the 9-inch Playmates ones from like
I've
the
seen
90s.
those before.
Yeah. I make photo comics with them. And, and I
I'm
have like,
familiar. Yeah.
yeah, and I have quite a collection of them now. There's next gen people and DS9 people and original series, and even a couple of Voyagers, even though Voyager is not my favorite show. There's a couple of, I have a 7 of 9 and a Tuvok back there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I like that there's a woman captain on that show. I mean, obviously there were women captains in Next Generation and stuff too. But
as a lead character,
But as the lead character, as the star of the show, as the one calling the shots, when there's no Federation above her, that's like that. Yeah.
And just like you said about LeVar Burton, the actor. I mean, Kate Mulgrew is terrific. I mean, and ever since when she definitely took that mantle of first woman lead in a Star Trek show, and I mean wears that proudly, and it's awesome to see her sort of carry that forward and be like, yeah, that was me. That's a big deal. Make a big deal about it because it was a big deal.
That was so perfectly cast. She's so commanding in her presence, in her stage presence. And it's interesting because the first movie I ever saw her in was a Billy Crystal movie in which she was like the sexy wife. And she's a good actress. Like that.
She is, for sure.
That's a character she's playing. She can play many other, she has range. Like but it's hard as a woman, it's hard to be commanding without being bitchy or being seen as bossy in a negative, and that's misogyny talking. But but she nailed it. And I'm just, the premise of that show I like much less than some of the other shows, and some of the storylines they decided to go after was just, it's not my favorite of the different series, but yeah, they definitely cast that part very well.
For real, yeah. Before we wrap up, if you want, we can talk about the Wendy's thing. I don't know how much time you have, but because I would love to get into because the Wendy's thing is just ridiculous.
Yeah, sure. So I haven't done any interviews about this. This just happened the other day. So a friend of mine, this was in Toledo. I'm up there regularly, as I mentioned, because I'm doing activism projects there and so on. So my friend, just for context, was having a terrible day. So her 15-year-old dog, who has cancer, who's deaf and blind, has been having very serious pain issues and whining and screaming at night. So they decided it's time. They took him to the vet to be put down. The doctor looked at this dog and said, "This dog has scabies. This is a parasite. This is treatable." Like, he's 15 and dumb, blind and deaf, and it has cancer, but like, we can treat that with a shot. So he gave him a shot, and he's like, if he's still terrible like this tomorrow, bring him back and we'll put him down. But we're going to give him a shot, literally, and we'll see what happens. So they gave the dog the shot. They were upset. My friend is a really good cook. It's, she usually makes dinner herself, and there's a pandemic, and she's very careful about not going out unnecessarily, except essential areas where you can't have things delivered, for things like that. But she was upset. Her daughter was upset. Her daughter is an adult. But whatever. Anyway, the two of them went to Wendy's for dinner. Not someplace they usually go, but they went there, and there was a long drive-through line. The lobby was open, but not for seated dining, just for to-go orders. So they decided to go inside. So they entered the building, and as soon as they walked in, they were greeted by a man at the counter, an employee, who said to them, the usual. And my friend had never been in this Wendy's before. I did not know this person. Her daughter, the same. And she said, I'm sorry, what? And he goes, two of everything. I should
Yeah.
point out my friend is, 230 pounds or so, and her daughter is also overweight according to the CDC.
Yeah.
Anyway, and my friend was upset about this, but at the same time, she's like, it's not worth it. So she was sarcastic back to him, and she said, I was just going to get a cheeseburger, but I told him a double because fuck you. And she got her food. Their daughter got their order. They left. And then she got out to the car, and her daughter started getting very visibly upset, and she realized how much that hurt her daughter. And she's like, I was thinking about this. And she's like, yeah, like that's not just something I should roll my eyes about. Actually, like this guy fat shamed me and my kid, like for
Yeah.
no fucking reason. And we're trying to relax and feel better about this the dog situation, and we don't have the energy to cook and the spoons to cook right now. We just want. And she got home, and she said, by the time I got home and I was thinking about this, I didn't even want a cheeseburger anymore,
Yeah.
So I was talking to her. She called me right after this happened, like from the car, and we were talking about it on the way home, and that she was driving. And I said, this is really inappropriate. I was like, send me a picture of your receipt, and I'm gonna, I'm on Twitter. I'm gonna tweet at Wendy's. We'll see what we can do, because that's not appropriate.
No.
And so I tweeted at Wendy's, and I said, hey, Wendy's, my friend just went to store number whichever, 8033 or whatever, and
Yeah.
Richard. According to the receipt, Richard at the counter said this to her, and I said, now she's crying and she doesn't even want her lunch, and so I don't think it got picked up by any news sources or anything viral, but it got a couple thousand retweets and a lot of replies. And it's kind of amazing how many of the replies are just people being horribly cruel and saying that this guy, like, oh, he works at Wendy's, he should move over to Arby's because like he's delivering roasts over here. And like he's like, I mean, like I get the joke, but like
Jesus.
that's pretty funny. But like,
Jesus
but
Christ.
in all seriousness though, like there were a lot of people like very seriously thinking it was okay and funny to like for that this guy fat shamed some
Yeah.
people just viciously, no reason, while they were upset. And like I get the want to laugh at situations that have a play on words and stuff like that, but like this was upsetting. And
Yeah.
Wendy's messaged me, and they were very clear. They're like, that's not okay. Can we have your friend's contact info? We want to make this right. And I gave them the contact info, and they reached out to her and got her phone number. The next day, the district manager, who happens to be a woman, said, when this came across my desk, I was horrified and literally speechless. Where she said, I didn't even know what to say. And she called her, and she's like, they had a nice phone call, and she's like, I don't want this guy to get fired. He's a low wage worker in a pandemic. Like, I'm not out for revenge here. She's like, it's just, he needs to understand that, I don't know if you have some kind of sensitivity training or something. If you do, I would like him to do that. But she's like, you can't talk to customers that way. It's just cruel and inappropriate. And it's, if you want to keep your job, if you want to, I mean, you're in a customer facing role, you don't do that to somebody you don't know like that. Without consent. And and on the Twitter thing, people were talking about, they were defending this as comedy, and they were talking about how, and it's like, yeah, he made a joke, and if it's not funny, then it's just then don't laugh. And it's like, well, yes and no. He's a worker at Wendy's. He's not a comedian doing stand-up.
Exactly.
She didn't pay money for a ticket to be roasted or something. Like, this is non-consensual insulting her and her daughter. This isn't comedy. Like, you're trying to like do a straw man type of thing by painting and framing this as comedy. This is misogyny. And anyway, so this turned into this whole thing because like people didn't believe that this happened. And by people, I mean men. And I tweeted about this. I was saying, like, look at the replies. All of the people saying bullshit, yeah, right, this is, you just are social justice, you want attention. They're all men. And all the women are like, I'm so sorry this happened. And they're telling stories of this happening to them. And they're like, yeah, like, look at this. Like, this is the normal experience for women in this country and around the world. It's a form of misogyny. It's not the same thing for a man to call another man fat as it is for a man to call a woman fat. It has to do with devaluing her as a worthwhile person, because women are only seen as worthwhile by toxic masculinity when they're sexually attractive, which means not overweight.
Yeah.
And it's anyway. The woman on the phone totally understood all of this, absolutely on her side. Apologized. My friend accepted this apology and declined a refund, and said, no, I just want him. If he can't be helped to grow and understand the inappropriateness of this, then he should be removed from a customer facing position. But I don't want him fired. I
Yeah.
insisted on and she said, I don't want there's a pandemic. He's a minimum wage worker or whatever you pay, and that's not my point here. um, and Yeah, and it's just really amazing. A lot of people are attacking her for this, and I just think it's just kind of remarkable in a way, the differences in the way that people are interpreting this based on their experience with gender and their experience with fat shaming.
Yeah. Well, and it's telling too, the people who immediately run to, oh, but it's comedy,
Right,
right? It's like, okay, yes, by a broad definition of comedy, I suppose it qualifies in the sense that he was telling a joke. But
right,
when they appeal to, oh, it's comedy, they're all, yeah, like you said, this guy is not a
right,
comedian, and he's telling a joke he didn't write. I'm just, it's bad enough if you come up with a really, really mean spirited joke, but it's your joke. I mean, at least it's your joke. You still shouldn't tell it to somebody to hurt their feelings, but at
right,
least it's your joke. You're telling a joke that you heard on a playground somewhere. It's not even your joke. Why are other people jumping in to defend your right to
right,
tell a joke you didn't even write,
right.
and not
And it's
receive
like,
consequences for it? Like yeah,
yeah, and
it's
and I think it's
ridiculous.
it's important to point out this aspect here of punching up and punching down too.
Yeah,
That,
absolutely.
like, yeah, comedy punches up. Good comedy punches up, I should
Yes,
say, unless
yes,
it's a roast, which is a different thing. Roasts are intentionally punching down, but they're still punching at things. Like, you can punch down in a roast, but it's consensual is the
exactly.
difference. And you are allowed to do things like fat shame in a roast, but people understand that's what they're signing up for. Comedy should not be doing that otherwise it's just mean. Comedy, if I mean, I'm not a professional comedian, but I've interviewed professional comedians about this. I had Keith Jensen on my show.
Hmm.
I
He's
had
great.
I had a lengthy conversation that I was unfortunately unable to record with Penn Jillette about this as well,
Hmm.
about the purpose of comedy and the importance of using it to punch up and attack people with power. I mean, comedy lets you say things that you're not able to get away with saying as plain language in a lot of cases, and you can do that, like satire, for example. Satire shames society into improvement by by mocking it and exaggerating aspects
Hmm.
of it.
Yeah.
And it serves a positive purpose like that. But it punches up. It punches at systems of power. Of It punches up at racism. It punches up at money. It does things
Hmm.
that are making other people oppressed. And this isn't punching up. This is just hating on somebody for something that has nothing to do with her worth as a person, and is just trying to make her feel bad.
Yeah.
And because he doesn't have an outlet that he feels like he's respected or listened to, or that his opinions matter or whatever. And it's like you were talking about before the show started, in terms of, like, you can, if you think these things, you should keep them to yourself anyway.
Yeah.
But even if you think these things and you do keep them to yourself, that's an opportunity for you to ask yourself, why am I thinking about something like this? And why is it funny to me that something that I would not say to a person, I'm thinking? Like,
Yeah.
and we talked about authenticity before, and it's part of anarchism. Authenticity is something I value very much. And when you were saying earlier about, sometimes you should just keep things to yourself, I was like, I want to save it for the show. But I think actually kind of the opposite in the way that I try to live my life. I try to say things that I think.
Yeah.
And if I wouldn't say something out loud, that tells me something about what I really feel
Right.
about that and why I'm thinking that. It gives me an opportunity for some self examination about that. And if I have a criticism, and it's a proper criticism of somebody, and it's appropriate, and it's punching up, or addressing something that I think they would want to know or whatever, then it's appropriate to say and authentic to talk about. But this clearly, like, he didn't. I just want to follow up with some of this. This situation has been resolved now, in the
Yeah.
sense
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
it committed to sensitivity training. He
That's
you
good.
know he he didn't deny it. Um, You know that this is there's a formal apology has been issued and accepted. That's where we are with this. She's done with the whole thing. She said, I've been, you know, I went to Wendy's, you know, when it's the first time when I was like a kid. I'm not going to just stop going there over this, you
Right.
know. um but but yeah, I mean, it's just, it gives us an opportunity, this situations like this, to talk about some of these issues and make progress on them. And you know, somebody brought up, like, I'm sure you've never laughed at a fat joke, and I was like, sure I have. But you know, now that I'm older and I understand that fat shaming punches down, I don't do that anymore.
Right.
and,
Exactly.
and you know, the point is, you want to try to be a better person. If you're not able to look back on your life and cringe, that's a bad thing. That means you haven't
Exactly.
grown very much, you know.
Yeah. Well, I
And
mean, yeah, it's
yeah.
like I've in my life, I mean,
Mhm.
I've laughed at racist jokes.
Sure.
I'm
Yeah,
not
me
proud of
too.
it. I'm
Yeah, same.
ashamed
I'm
of
not
it,
proud of it now.
but
I didn't
it's
care back then, but yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
can't just cite that and say, well, you know, you never laughed at a racist joke. No, I have, and I wish I hadn't. I hope I'm a
Mhm.
better person than that now.
Yeah, and
Like,
you
what
make
is,
amends, you know, as you're able
yeah,
to, with the people that you've, you know. But the point is, like we were talking about this before, that you know, once a decent person understands that they have hurt somebody, or that they are hurting somebody, they stop doing it, and
yeah,
they try to fix it, and they try to do what they can to correct for it in the future.
yeah.
And I think that if everybody just approached life in that way, that we would all just be so much better off. And especially when there's a pandemic, that's a necessary attitude for people to have, if we're going to pull through this, you know.
Yeah, and I do I like the attitude that you're. I mean, it speaks well of your friend's character that they were
Mhm,
like, no, I don't want him to lose his job,
mhm.
you know, because but a lot of it is also, you know, and the fact that the guy didn't deny it, which
Yeah.
again, you know, good for him, but
Mhm.
like. I think a lot of these things happen sometimes because people just aren't like they grow up in a family circle or a circle of friends or whatever, and people talk this way to each other and talk this way about other people, and they're never really challenged on it.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
like
yeah, I think he just was counting on
yeah,
assumption that he would not be held accountable, because men aren't.
yeah,
And the reason that men were responding to this thread were saying either this was made up or it's not a big deal, is, you know, it's kind of weird, because like they're saying it's so outrageous that it must be made up, but then they're saying, what's the big deal, it's just a joke. It's like, well,
yes,
pick one here, you
exactly,
know. Is it
exactly.
so outrageous that, like, I made it up, that, you know, clearly if this is true, then this would have been on the news? Like, somebody said that, like, how come this wasn't on the news? And it's like, because this happens every day. Like,
Hmm.
it's not newsworthy, it's just I tweeted about it, that's all. I mean, it's this is normal. That's, misogyny is systemic, that's what that means,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
everywhere.
and I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of call bullshit on that premise too, because I mean,
Mhm.
it's not difficult to find stories like that that have
Right.
made the news. I
Every Yeah.
mean, yeah,
Like,
it's
every
not as if
woman you talk to will, or,
yeah,
you know, every non-man you talk to is gonna have a dozen stories like this from the last month,
yeah,
you
it's not
know? Yeah,
remotely unheard of.
right.
So the idea, like, I don't even really believe that. I'm like, no, it's there's nothing unbelievable
Mhm.
about this story at all. I
Yeah,
mean,
and, like, I
it,
have
yeah,
proof. I have screenshots from talking to Wendy's through DM. I have the receipt, like, this happened.
yeah,
But, you know, it doesn't even matter, because the people who are convinced that I'm doing this for attention are they're gonna accuse me of Photoshop if I show
yes,
them. It doesn't matter. You
you
know? Yeah.
you invented a very negative interaction at Wendy's from for a friend of yours
Right.
so that you could do it so that you could tell people about it to get attention. I love
Right.
like that's
I've been
how
accused of this
convoluted
by
it.
multiple people independently. It's kind of
Like
hilarious.
if
Yeah.
if you're gonna make it up, make it you. You're the one who
Right?
ordered the burger and got insulted. Like,
Yeah.
you know, but why would you
Mhm.
make it another? Yeah,
It's just
it's
just they're looking,
ridiculous.
they're just trying to defend misogyny in any way they
Yeah,
can.
it's
And yeah,
ridiculous.
because then if they address it, then they understand that, oh shit, I've got to change, you know?
Well, that's the big thing.
Yeah.
And I know, you know, as I'm sure you know, and I certainly know from experience. I mean, that's the most difficult thing is doing
Hmm.
that thing that you said a minute ago. Like if you do find the mean spirited joke funny, and you know enough not to say it, but you still, you know, internally are giggling at it. I mean, the most difficult thing is to look in the mirror and to say, like, you know, do I need to change here?
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, there have been many times in my life personally where I've had to do that.
Hmm.
And and you know, sometimes some have been easier than others. Like sometimes it's been like it was just a matter of being aware of it and it's instantaneous. You're like, oh shit, I shouldn't do that anymore, and then
Right.
that's it. But
Hmm.
then, but other times, like, if like for some, like removing like ableist language from my
Yeah.
vocabulary, that's been something that I have worked on for a while, and I'm a ton better at it than I
It
used
takes
to be.
practice.
It takes a lot.
That's all it
Yeah,
is, you know?
because it's
Yeah.
so normalized, it's
Hmm.
so normalized. But I have, so some of it has taken more effort than other things, but
Hmm.
I have never regretted it. Like I have, when people say, like, especially when you talk about, like, thinking about the words you use, or thinking
Hmm.
about the way you talk about other people, and you always get somebody, especially if you're talking about it online, who will jump up and say, "Oh, language police," and you can't say anything anymore, and there are all these words that you're not allowed to use.
Actions have consequences.
Yeah,
What?
well, and it's like, and my thought is like, yeah, okay. I mean, there are certain words that I used to use that I don't use anymore.
Yep.
I have never for a second regretted it. I have
Yep.
never for a second felt hemmed in or put upon or oppressed because I decided, because I wanted to be a better person, not to use this word or this word or this. Like, I don't feel like I've lost anything. And
Right.
I kind of feel, I get irritated, but I also kind of feel sorry for people who are so convinced that, like, if you stop calling people the R word, like, you're going to
Mhm.
lose something vital about yourself that you can't get back. Like, there's something about that that's very tragic to me, you
Yeah.
know, or, you can't verbally abuse trans people. You can't verbally abuse women. Like, what about, you know, what
It's
about
just,
you are you
yeah.
afraid you're going to lose,
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
and it's also just about believing people. Like that we were talking before about how privilege causes blindness to the
Yeah.
oppression.
Yeah.
And like if a trans person or if a woman is telling you when you call women fat, it's misogyny. It's there's another level of it that as a man you're not able to understand. And you just have to trust me on this
Yeah.
because that's what privilege means. And it's cruel. Even if you don't understand that it's cruel, you're not going to be able to understand as the way a woman does how cruel it is. So you just have to not do it. And like it costs you nothing
No.
not to do this. It's just the nicer, kinder way to be. And it's you have to wonder about people who decide to be so unkind, like that they
Yeah.
choose to live their life that way. You know, um, that it's just so unfortunate that like the that some people just treat the people the way that they do, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
and I can't imagine that they're really happy, like genuinely. I think that they have it's like the song evil is a relay sport when the one who's burned turns to pass the torch.
Yeah.
And therapy puts the torch out, but you have to want it. You have to seek
Yeah.
that. And if people have an example from the community or from their childhood or their relationships or whatever of you can treat people this way and it's okay or it's good or it's socially acceptable or it's not considered um, as hurtful as it actually really is, then you're not going to understand the depth of the problem. And especially, like, this is one of the reasons that I talk about Black Lives Matter and about race so much as a
Yeah.
white person. And this the same thing plays into this about in a racist society. Angela Davis said, if in a racist society, it's not enough to be not racist. You have to be anti-racist.
Right.
And the way so in the same sense of as a white person, the reason that I talk so much about race is because racists will not listen to black people about race. Or any person of color. They just
Yeah.
won't. They don't believe them when they say this is a problem, or they either say that didn't happen, or if it happened, it's because you're lazy, or because or whatever other reason they come up with. And they believe it better if it's coming from a white person. They actually are like, wait, really? And it's like, yeah, I'm just telling you what they said.
Yeah.
I'm literally handing you a book written by a person of color. Like, it's just for some reason you wouldn't read it just seeing it on the shelf. But if I tell you the same quote, now you believe it. And that's
Yeah.
racism talking. And,
Absolutely.
and it's the same thing with misogyny and stuff. You just have to believe women. It just comes,
Yeah. Well, and
it's hard for men to do.
and again, I mean, just like we were talking before about a little while ago about mutual aid stuff. Like, if you
Mhm.
if you think about it for a few seconds, it makes sense. You just have to
Yep.
break through that sort of block in your mind. I mean,
And
what
that
other
block, yeah.
if another person tells you that you are doing something that hurts them,
Hmm.
especially if you're talking about like emotional or psychological damage that you're doing. Like,
Yeah.
what other proof do you need? Like, if I say something to you, completely not meaning anything by it, but I just happen to say something that you find really offensive or really hurtful, and you say, you know what, that thing you said, that really, I wish you wouldn't say that. Like, what other proof do I like? Do people think that people are just making it up?
Well,
Like, what other proof do I
well,
need?
the reason I think, honestly, is because there are cases where people lie about that, and it's called gaslighting. And
Well, yeah,
that's
that's
just
true.
something that manipulative, abusive people
Yeah.
do, is they try to turn things around so that you're at fault by saying that, you're not allowed to say certain things, you're not allowed to express things, or I'm going to, like, if you don't want me to beat you, then you shouldn't say that. And then they
Yeah.
have this idea that it's acceptable to limit people's speech, and that it's, or whatever. And I think it's, yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. And like I was saying before, like, therapy could solve a lot of these problems, but people have to want to be better as a necessary condition for getting better.
That's yeah,
And
that's yeah,
yeah,
and you can't. I mean, I guess you can't argue somebody into that,
yeah.
and
Well,
just
yeah,
yeah,
I think you can. It takes time and effort, and it takes a lot of one-on-one. It's very difficult to do in this type of setting.
right,
It's a lot easier to do in the door-to-door, like the way churches do it, where they send somebody door to door to talk to you. The reason that it's very expensive to do that, it's very risky to do that, but the reason they do it is because it's incredibly effective. Humans are storytelling animals, and when you can
yeah,
relate to somebody on a narrative like that, and take into context their specific situation, you can absolutely change people's minds. There's a comedian, um, he's a black man. I can't remember his name right now. Daryl something, who has made a career. Basically, now he has a TV show about it. Out of going around the South to KKK members,
hmm,
the white supremacy. He's a black man, and talking to them and convincing them to quit the KKK. He has collected hundreds of KKK hoods that these people have given him after quitting, because he just went and talked to them one-on-one and showed them, I'm a real person with feelings, and I have a family, and I have people who care about me, and it hurts me and it hurts them when you say these things, when you do these things. And it's not that they're incapable of being talked out of it, it's just it hasn't happened, because a lot of them, you can go your whole life as a Christian and never meet another non-Christian. They have Christian
oh
preschools, and they
yeah,
have Christian private schools, they have Christian hospitals and Christian colleges, and Christian TV channels and Christian radio stations, and it's, you can go your whole life never meeting a black person as a white person in this country. So if you're taught that black people are lazy and black people are criminals, and you've never met one,
yeah,
I can understand. I don't agree, but I can understand why you would hold that belief. And if you're isolated from any other information, but that's not a justification for treating black people as less than human. That's just an explanation of why you had that belief.
right,
Once you are exposed to the information that that this is actually not true, then it's incumbent upon you to change your mind about that. There's a really interesting book by Daniel Kahneman, who's the Nobel Prize winner, who writes about how brains work in neuroscience and so on. And he talks about system one and system two thinking in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And I don't often recommend books by white dudes, but this is a really good one. But he talks about how, so we have what he calls system one thinking, which are these intuitive kind of thoughts, these gut feeling type of thoughts that come up first. So these are the thoughts like, if somebody sees a black person and they feel a little bit of fear just walking down the street,
yeah,
that's internalized racism. That's something that that you're taught. And so but then the second thought that pops up when you have that insight of, why am I nervous right now? That's just a guy. He's not doing shit. I have
yeah,
no, that is the real you. So this is what society has taught you to think. This is what you really think. So this diminishes over time as you continue to consciously focus on replacing these thoughts with these thoughts. And you can train yourself to do this. And there's a book about it. But yeah, it takes literal conscious effort to rewire your brain. I mean, they're plastic. You can do it. But
yeah,
if you have these encoded patterns of messages that you've never questioned before, it is physically difficult to do without having rewired it first. It's a chicken and egg thing, but you have to put the conscious effort in, and then it becomes easier.
Yeah, but and it is something that you can do. I mean, and just
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
the fact that it's been normal to you up to this point is not an excuse. You
Right.
know, it doesn't let you off
It's
the
an
hook. Like
explanation,
it's an
but it's not a
explanation.
justification.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Woo! Oh no, Jordy,
There goes my plate of apples.
Deanna.
I'm sure they'll be all right. They're on a away mission.
Yeah, they're all they've been through worse. They've been through. Jordy fell in a hole with a Romulan one time. He's fine.
Yeah.
They went through that.
I just watched that episode recently. Actually.
Yeah,
and yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, but well, it's just as well. I was getting ready to wrap up anyway, but yeah. So I mean, I don't know what else to say other than thank you so much for being here.
My
and
pleasure.
and
Yep.
for talking with us about all this stuff. And once again, it's been on the screen the whole time, and we've mentioned it a few times. But anybody watching, and I know a couple people in the chat said they were going to donate to Feed Louisville.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Yeah.
So it's the info for Feed Louisville is in the description of the video, and also as well as Danielle's info, where you can follow her on Twitter and donate to her Patreon, please, if you would be so kind, and support her excellent work. And yeah. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend.
Thank you.
Really good to talk to
thank you, Steve. It's been genuinely a pleasure to catch up with you. I have such fond memories of the Air and Space Museum. That was my only visit ever to there. Oh. And as a Star Trek fan, and as a fan of NASA history, my biological dad worked for NASA for one summer when he was in college.
Oh, that's so cool.
And I've heard a lot of great stories, and it's always been a passion of mine. I've just never been there except that one time, and I think about that trip often. Thank you for taking me.
Oh, of course.
And to the people watching this, again, thank you so much for taking the time to listen and to care about these issues. And like I said, if you want to reach out, I always I'm happy to chat with anybody who has questions or wants book recommendations or just wants to just connect with me, for activism networking purposes. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of those. And of course, my Patreon. Please support that if you can. If you can't, please share it with a couple of people who you think would be interested in doing so.
Absolutely. Every little bit helps.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.